The Amish backyard secret, quietly earning $6 a month and your neighbors never notice. But here's what most people get wrong about this. They think the money comes from what you grow. It doesn't. The real income is hiding in plain sight, and it's something your neighbors will walk past 100 times and never once connect to the hundreds of dollars moving into your bank account every single week. This is about an entire category of high-value micro-enterprises that operate without signs, without footprint, without anyone on your street knowing they exist. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how 3 different people are doing this right now, all from properties smaller than a quarter acre. If you're trying to turn your backyard into real income, and you haven't subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of content that changes the math on what's actually possible from your own land. So hit that subscribe button now. And before you go any further, I want to know, have you ever tried to make money from a garden or a small piece of land before? Drop a comment below and tell me what you tried and what happened, because I promise you, seeing what actually works is going to shift how you think about your property. Wait, before we move forward, I need you to understand something fundamental that changes everything in this conversation. The complete guide to backyard income systems, the one that breaks down the exact setup costs, the monthly revenue benchmarks, the seasonal timing that maximizes profit, and the legal structures that keep everything completely under the radar. That's available in the description and pinned in the comments. It's the resource that shows you not just the ideas, but the mechanism behind why these work. You can go much deeper there. Now let's talk about what's really happening in these backyards, because the pattern is stranger than you might expect. Most people assume backyard income comes from volume, from growing a lot of something and selling it. But the 3 income streams that are actually working, the ones generating 5 figures a month from properties that look completely ordinary, they operate on an entirely different principle. Ultra-high value per unit, combined with zero waste, combined with revenue that's not tied to seasons or weather or your own labor after the initial setup. The first model, and the one that's probably already in your neighborhood, is something most people dismiss as a hobby before they ever understand what it actually generates. It's called microgreen production, but not the kind where you're farming them like a food business. This is different. Here's what makes it work. One standard 10-20 growing tray, the kind you can buy for under $5, holds roughly 200 to 300 microgreens. The growing medium costs about 75 cents per tray. Seeds run about $1.50. You're looking at $3 in costs per tray, total. That tray, when harvested at the 12 to 14-day mark, and this is where the math gets interesting, can be sold wholesale to restaurants for between $25 and $45 depending on the variety and your local market. But most people stop there. They think that's the ceiling. It isn't. A single customer at a farmer's market, just one person, just one market booth, just one Saturday morning, will pay between $6 and $9 per clamshell of microgreens. If you're running 6 trays a week that are all ready for harvest simultaneously, that's 30 to 50 pounds of microgreens moving per week. At retail pricing, that's between $200 and $450 per week from a single farmer's market. But here's the part that stays hidden. Most people never calculate what happens when you add the second market, the third market, the restaurant that starts ordering bulk for their salad bar and their catering operations, the small grocery stores that want your branded product on their shelf because the commercial stuff their distributor brings in is 2 weeks old. 3 of these income channels running simultaneously from the same growing space, which, remember, fits entirely in a basement corner or a converted closet, moves you from a few $100s a month to somewhere between $1,400 and $2,200 monthly. And the space requirement? 4 by 8 feet of shelving under LED grow lights. The startup cost? Under $400. The time investment after the first 2 weeks of setup? About 8 hours a week. But microgreens are actually the smallest piece of this puzzle, and this is where the pattern becomes really interesting. The second income stream operating in these same backyards is something almost nobody recognizes as a business at all, because it doesn't look like farming. It doesn't look like anything. It's hidden behind a simple door in a garden shed, completely invisible from the street. Mushroom growing has this reputation as complicated, as something that requires PhDs in mycology and expensive equipment. That reputation is completely false, and it's actually maintained by the people who want to keep their operation quiet and profitable. Here's the reality. Growing gourmet mushrooms in a 5 by 8 foot garden shed takes one initial investment of about $250 for substrate materials, spores, and basic equipment. After that, your cost per pound of finished mushrooms is under $3. Now, a standard 5 by 8 shed running simple shelf systems can produce approximately 120 to 150 pounds of finished mushrooms per month. At the farmer's market, gourmet mushrooms, and this is crucial, are not priced like commodity produce. They're priced like specialty food. Wholesale to restaurants is even better, $18 to $24 per pound, because restaurants can use them immediately in their kitchen and the supply is consistent. 130 pounds at $18 per pound. That's $2,340 monthly from mushrooms alone. The same person, the same property, the same backyard that nobody on the street suspects is generating income. But the third system is where this entire pattern becomes almost invisible, because it combines the infrastructure you've already built with something most people don't even realize has become incredibly profitable in the last 3 years. High-value plant propagation is the business model that's been quietly running in suburban backyards with almost zero visibility, and it's generating some of the most consistent income on this list. Here's how it works. Certain ornamental plant varieties, particularly variegated or rare cultivars that have become internet famous through plant collector communities, cost between $50 and $200 per mature specimen when you buy them from specialized retailers. But these plants root incredibly easily from cuttings. A single mother plant, maintained in a humid propagation setup, can produce 50 to 100 viable cuttings per growing cycle. Each cutting, once rooted and established over 6 to 8 weeks, can be sold as a juvenile plant for $8 to $18 depending on the species and size. What makes this work isn't the single sale, it's the compound volume. One collector operating from a single shelving unit with proper humidity control, using the same grow lights and space that the microgreens operation uses during off hours, can maintain 10 to 15 mother plants. Each mother plant produces new cuttings on a staggered schedule. That means consistent rooted cuttings available for sale every 3 to 5 days, sold through established online platforms where plant collectors actively hunt for exactly what you're propagating. One person, running this system part-time from that same basement space, moving 15 rooted cuttings per week at an average of $11 each, plus the occasional mature specimen sale at $50 to $80. That's between $850 and $1,500 monthly from the same 4 by 8 foot footprint that already had the microgreens operation. But here's where this gets really interesting, and this is the moment where I need you to hear this carefully. These three systems, running simultaneously in the same physical space, aren't competing for resources. They're actually using the exact same infrastructure in complementary ways. The grow lights that are on a timer for microgreens 16 hours a day can support the propagation work during the remaining 8 hours. The humidity that mushrooms require is actually beneficial for rooting cuttings. The temperature control that serves one serves all three. One person, working approximately 12 to 14 hours per week, managing all three operations, is generating somewhere between $4,200 and $5,800 monthly from a suburban residential property that sits completely invisibly on a quiet street. The neighbors will never see a sign. There's no client flow. There's no visible supply chain. The revenue flows through online platforms, farmers markets that they attend like anyone else, and quiet restaurant relationships that started with a single conversation and a sample. This is the secret that Amish farmers discovered centuries ago, and that's being rediscovered right now in suburban backyards across North America. The most profitable operations are the ones nobody knows exist. Not because they're illegal, they're completely legitimate and operate within all residential regulations in most jurisdictions. But because visibility attracts competition, attracts questions, attracts attention that disrupts the entire business model. The moment you put up a sign, the moment your operation becomes known, 3 things happen almost immediately. Other people start doing the same thing in your market, driving prices down. Neighbors begin making noise complaints or raising questions with local authorities about whether it's permitted. And most importantly, the simplicity and quietness that makes the business actually work starts getting complicated. This entire system is built on the principle that was central to Amish farming practices for generations: efficiency through simplicity, income through invisibility, and sustainability through self-sufficiency rather than marketing. Now, most people who hear about this setup want to know the same thing. What's the actual timeline from start to first real income? And that's a completely fair question, because it matters whether you're looking at immediate side income or a longer build that pays off over months. For microgreens, the timeline is fastest. You can go from completely empty space to your first farmer's market sale in approximately 4 weeks. That's 2 weeks of setup and learning, plus 2 complete growing cycles. Your first month might generate $500 to $800 if you hit 2 markets and 1 restaurant contact. Month 2 jumps to $1,200 to $1,800. Month 3 and beyond is stable at $1,500 to $2,200 because you've optimized the schedule and you understand your market. Mushrooms take slightly longer to establish. The substrate needs to colonize properly, which takes 4 to 6 weeks on the first flush. So you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks before your first harvest. But once it's established, it produces continuously. That 130 pounds per month becomes reliable and predictable. Plant propagation sits somewhere in the middle. Your first rooted cuttings are ready to sell within 6 to 8 weeks, but building up enough mother plant inventory to generate 15 cuttings per week takes an additional 4 to 6 weeks. So sustained monthly income from this channel is typically a 3-month process, which means, and this is important, if you start all 3 systems simultaneously, your month 1 is probably around $700 to $1,500 from microgreens alone. Your month 2 jumps to between $2,200 and $3,200 as microgreens scale and mushrooms start producing their first flush. By month 3, you're somewhere in that $4,000 to $5,800 range, assuming you've executed each system correctly. But before we go further into the specific mechanics and the exact setup steps, let me ask you something that matters more than any of these numbers. What actually makes this work isn't the money, though the money is absolutely real and absolutely substantial. What makes it work is understanding that your backyard, your property, the space that you've probably considered economically invisible, it's actually sitting on top of an entire ecosystem of value that nobody ever taught you to see. Most people are stuck in the mental model where farming means big land, big equipment, big visibility, big risk. But the Amish have operated for centuries on a completely different principle. Smaller is often more profitable when you're operating at efficiency and discretion. Larger operations attract overhead, attention, regulation, and competition that erodes margins. Smaller operations that are strategically optimized can move extraordinary amounts of value through minimal space and with complete invisibility. That's the foundation of everything we're going to walk through in the sections coming next. But first, I want you to understand one critical thing that separates people who try this and fail from the people who are actually doing it successfully. The difference isn't talent or luck or having the perfect location. The difference is understanding the actual mechanisms underneath why these 3 systems work, which means knowing not just what to grow, but what to grow for your specific market, how to price it strategically, how to manage your time so you're not burned out after 2 months, and most importantly, how to set up your legal and financial structure so that everything stays clean and sustainable and you're not creating complications for yourself down the road. And that's exactly what the comprehensive guide is designed to walk you through. The step-by-step setup for each system, the exact cost breakdowns, the monthly revenue models, the seasonal timing that maximizes income, the market research template that tells you what's actually profitable in your specific area, and the common mistakes that destroy profitability before people ever see real money. You can find that in the description, pinned in the comments section below, and I'm telling you right now, the level of detail in there, the templates, the actual numbers from people who are running these systems, that's information that changes the calculation for what's possible from your property. Now let's actually walk through the second hidden income stream in detail, because this is where things get really strategic. This second method is the one that separates people who dabble from people who actually build a system. It's called microgreens production, and the reason it works so quietly is because it requires almost no visible footprint. You're not farming acres. You're not even farming a full garden bed. You're farming in vertical trays stacked inside a space most people would use to store garden tools. A single standard microgreens tray, we're talking about something that measures roughly 10 by 20 inches, maybe 3 inches deep. That single tray will produce somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds of finished microgreens. And here's where the money starts appearing. Those microgreens sell wholesale to restaurants for between $1.2 and $1.8 per pound. At farmers markets, directly to consumers, you're looking at $1.8 to $2.8 per pound. Some specialty markets, particularly if you're growing rare varieties like purple radish or peppery arugula, you can push that to $3.0 or even $3.5 per pound. The reason restaurants buy from small producers instead of suppliers is because microgreens start degrading immediately after harvest. A restaurant that buys from a local grower gets product that's literally 2 hours old. Produce that came through a distribution center might be 2 weeks old. The flavor difference is massive. The visual difference is massive, and chefs will pay premium prices for that freshness. Here's the actual math. If you're producing 5 trays per week, and that's a totally manageable number for someone working a day job, you're producing somewhere around 5 to 10 pounds of microgreens per week. Let's say you hit an average of 7 pounds, selling at an average of $2.00 per pound. That's $1.40 per week just in revenue. Multiply that by 52 weeks, and you're looking at $7.280 per year from 5 trays. But here's where it gets strategic. Most people stop at 5 trays. They think that's the limit. Actually, you can scale this. If you stack trays vertically using simple metal shelving, the kind you buy at any hardware store for $8 to $1.50, you can fit 20 to 30 trays in a space that's maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. That's the footprint of a large closet, or a corner of a shed, or honestly, even the area under a basement window if you have south or west-facing light. If you're running 20 trays on rotation, meaning some are being harvested while others are germinating, others are in the growth phase, you're now producing roughly 25 to 35 pounds per week. At $2.00 per pound average, that's $5.00 to $7.00 per week. That's $2.0600 to $3.0600 per year, coming out of a 4 by 4 foot space that nobody even notices exists. The setup cost is remarkably low. Seeds run you about $2.00 to $4.00 per variety for a bulk supply that lasts months. Trays cost around $1 to $3 each if you buy in bulk, and they last multiple seasons. Shelving, as I mentioned, is $1.00 to $2.00. LED grow lights, which you absolutely need if you're doing this indoors, run $1.50 to $4.00, depending on the system. Your total initial investment is probably $5 to $8, and you start making that back in the first 2 to 3 weeks of production. The real variable that determines whether this becomes $3.000 a month or just a curious experiment is sales channels. You have 3 options. Option 1, sell to local restaurants. This is the most stable, but requires the most legwork up front. You need to identify restaurants that use fresh herbs, salads, and plated vegetables. You prepare samples, you build relationships, you negotiate contracts. Once you have 3 to 5 restaurants on a regular weekly order, your revenue becomes predictable. Option 2, farmers market. This gives you retail prices, which are higher, but you have to show up every week, manage inventory, deal with weather. Some markets are competitive. Others, particularly in suburban areas, are desperate for fresh producers. You might sell out by noon, or you might go home with half your inventory. The consistency is less reliable than the restaurant route, but the per-pound pricing is better. Option 3, direct-to-consumer subscriptions. You create a simple website, or even just use Instagram and a payment link, and you offer microgreens subscriptions. Customers pay $2.05 to $4.00 per week for a curated box of 3 to 5 microgreens varieties delivered to their home. This requires cold outreach, but builds recurring revenue. It's the slowest to grow, but the most passive once it's built. Most people who run serious microgreens operations do a combination, maybe 60% restaurant contracts, 30% farmers market, 10% subscriptions. The mix depends on your area and your willingness to do sales work. The income stream itself is genuinely invisible. No sign, no customers arriving at your house, no inventory sitting around. What you harvest sells within hours. The neighbors see nothing. Before we continue, I want to pause here because this is where people make their first major mistake. Wait, this part is important. Most people assume that once they set up the shelving and buy the lights, they're done. They're not. The real income generation happens in the selling phase, not the growing phase. And that's exactly where the complete guide I mentioned earlier becomes essential reading. It walks you through the actual sales templates, the restaurant pitch deck that converts, the market research showing you which demographics buy the most microgreens in your specific area, the pricing psychology that lets you charge premium prices without pushback, and the supplier relationships that other growers have already built and documented for you. That guide is in the description and pinned in the comments. It's a paid resource, and honestly, What people spend on it, they typically make back in their first month, because they avoid the trial and error phase that costs most growers 3 to 6 months of wasted produce and missed sales opportunities. Now let's move into the third income stream, because this one combines the stealth factor with the highest profit margin of anything we're covering today, and it requires something most people already have sitting in their garage or their basement right now. This is mushroom cultivation, specifically oyster mushrooms, and the reason it stays invisible is because it literally happens in the dark. You don't need light, you don't need a garden, you don't need outdoor space at all. A closet, a corner of a basement, the space under a staircase. That's your farm. The mechanism is this. You inoculate a substrate that's just sterilized material like straw, sawdust, or grain with mushroom spawn, which is basically mushroom mycelium, the vegetative part of the fungus. You let it colonize in a warm, dark space for 2 to 3 weeks. Then, you induce fruiting by exposing it to fresh air and moisture, and within 7 to 10 days, you have harvestable mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms, depending on variety, sell for $1.02 to $2.00 per pound at farmers markets. Some specialty varieties, like king oysters or blue oysters, push toward $2.05 per pound. Restaurants will buy from you at $1.00 to $1.04 per pound wholesale, sometimes higher for specialty types. Gourmet mushroom growers report markups of 300% to 500% at retail compared to what they cost to produce. Here's where the scaling works. One 5-gallon bucket inoculated with oyster mushroom spawn can produce 1 to 2 pounds of mushrooms per flush. A flush is one harvest cycle. That bucket will give you multiple flushes, typically 3 to 5 flushes over 2 to 3 months before the substrate is spent. So one bucket produces somewhere between 3 and 10 pounds of finished mushrooms over its lifetime. If you run 20 buckets on a staggered schedule, meaning some are colonizing, some are producing, some are resting between flushes, you're looking at a continuous production cycle. In a single month, from 20 buckets at various stages, you might harvest 15 to 25 pounds of mushrooms. At an average of $1.06 per pound retail, that's $2.40 to $4.000 per month from 20 buckets. Scale that to 50 buckets, and you're at $6.00 to $1.00 per month. 100 buckets, and you're solidly in the $1 to month-u, $2 monthly range. And here's the truly hidden part. You can do this in spaces that legitimately nobody ever sees. Under basement stairs, behind a utility closet, even a crawl space if you're willing to work in uncomfortable conditions. The only requirements are darkness, stable temperature between 55 and 75 degrees, and humidity in the 80 to 95% range. A space that stays at 65 degrees and 85% humidity is productive. Most basements naturally hit that in cooler months. The startup cost is minimal. Mushroom spawn costs $1.00 to $2.00 per batch. Substrate materials, straw, sawdust, run $5 to $1.05 for enough to inoculate multiple buckets. Buckets themselves, if you're reusing food-grade containers you already have or find, are free. If you buy new ones, they're $2 to $5 each. Basic supplies like spray bottles and a humidity gauge might be $3.00 to $5.00. Your total initial investment might be $1.00 to $2.00, and you're producing income within 4 weeks. The real question isn't whether you can produce mushrooms. The question is where you sell them. Restaurants want consistency. Farmers market customers want novelty and education. Direct-to-consumer wants convenience. If you're running 50 buckets and hitting 50 pounds per month, you probably need a mix. 8 restaurants buying 4 pounds per week each is 32 pounds. A farmer's market stall moving 15 pounds one day per week is another 15 pounds. Subscriptions capture the rest. But notice what's happening across all 3 of these income streams. You're not running a business that requires visibility. You're not building infrastructure that your neighbors can see. You're not creating inventory that takes up your whole property. You're running a production system that sits inside the margins of normal residential life. And that's the actual secret. Now, the reason I'm showing you all 3 of these together, the microgreens, the mushrooms, the Amish-inspired cultivation patterns that stay completely hidden, is because they represent the actual strategy. This isn't about picking one and doing it halfway. This is about understanding that they stack. Most successful backyard farmers aren't just growing microgreens. They're running microgreens production to stabilize cash flow. They're running mushrooms as a higher margin backup. They're integrating other herbs or specialty crops into the same distribution channels. One person, working part-time, maybe 10 to 15 hours per week once systems are established, can run all three. And the combined monthly income from this exact setup, if properly managed, ranges from $3.000 on the conservative end to $8.000 or higher on the optimized end. From a property that shows zero visible sign of commercial activity. From neighbors who have no idea what's happening 30 feet away. The question at this point is probably, how do I actually start? How do I avoid the mistakes that sink most people in their first 3 months? How do I know which of these is right for my specific situation, my climate, my market? That's exactly why the complete guide exists. It maps out the decision tree. Which crop makes sense in your region based on local demand? Which setup fits your available space? Which sales channel converts best in your specific area? It includes the actual production schedules, the supplier lists that other growers have vetted, the pricing models that different markets will actually accept, and most importantly, the financial projections that show you month by month what to expect in year one. You can grab that guide right now in the description or in the pinned comment. It's a paid resource designed by people who've already run these systems, and what you'll find in there is worth probably $2 to $5.000 in mistakes you won't make and income you won't leave on the table. But before we talk about how to actually execute this, there's one more income stream hiding in plain sight that almost nobody outside of a very specific agricultural tradition even knows exists. And when I show you this last one, you're going to understand why I said at the beginning that this secret has been quietly earning people $6 a month while their neighbors never notice a thing. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. And to understand it, we have to talk about something that sits at the intersection of agriculture, tradition, and economics that almost nobody in the mainstream gardening world even acknowledges. The Amish and Old Order farming communities have known for generations that the highest value crops aren't always the ones that feed families. They're the ones that heal them. And they're not talking about medicinal herbs you'd find on a health store shelf. They're talking about rarity, about heritage, about scarcity. Here's what most people miss. While everyone else is growing tomatoes and lettuce and zucchini, crops that are abundant, cheap, and commoditized, a very quiet subset of growers has been cultivating something completely different. They grow plants and seeds and specimens that collectors will pay 10, 20, sometimes 50 times more for than a standard vegetable. A single heirloom seed packet from a rare variety that's nearly extinct that can sell for $8 to $2.05. A small rooted cutting of a rare houseplant variety that took you 60 days to propagate? That moves online for $1.05 to $4.00. A mature specimen of an unusual fruiting plant or ornamental shrub that you've been nurturing for 2 years? Museums, landscapers, serious gardeners, and plant collectors will bid $1.00 to $4.00 for it. But there's more to this than just growing unusual plants. The Amish secret, the one that generates $6.00 a month from a backyard that your neighbors will never notice, is that they've turned propagation itself into the business. They don't just grow one rare plant, they multiply it. They propagate cuttings from that one specimen year after year, keeping meticulous records, selling to the same customer base over and over. One grower I researched has been propagating rare fuchsia varieties for 12 years. She produces approximately 80 to 100 rooted cuttings every 8 weeks. At $1.08 to $2.02 per cutting, sold through her own website, local garden clubs, and online plant communities, that's between $1.8440 and $2.200 per propagation cycle. With 4 to 5 cycles per year, she's looking at $5.760 to $1.100 annually from a 6 by 8 foot propagation area in her shed that nobody on her street even knows exists. The economics of this work in your favor because rooting hormones are cheap, $5 to $8 per bottle, which treats hundreds of cuttings. Your propagation medium, peat, perlite, vermiculite, costs pennies per pot. The real value isn't the material. It's the knowledge, it's the time, it's the rarity of the plant itself. And here's the thing that makes this completely invisible from the street. Propagation doesn't require a visible garden. It doesn't require market stalls or signage or traffic. It's mail order. It's Instagram. It's a Facebook group for rare plant enthusiasts. It's a simple website with a catalog of 40 to 60 rooted cuttings available for shipping, restocked every 6 to 8 weeks. A $4.00 rooted cutting ships in a padded mailer for $5 to $7 postage. Profit, $3 to $3.5 on a single item. You can do that 50 times a month and never leave your property. This is why it's invisible. This is why your neighbors never notice. This is why the Amish growers, who are often operating under very specific restrictions about what kind of businesses they can run, have turned to this model so successfully. No storefront needed, no employees, no zoning violations, no signage, no foot traffic. Just a propagation area, a simple website or social media presence, and a knowledge of which plants are rare, which rooting techniques work, and which customer communities will pay premium prices for exclusivity and authenticity. The Amish didn't invent this secret because they wanted to stay wealthy. They used it because they had to stay invisible. But what they actually discovered was that invisibility is profitable, that quiet is an advantage, that the businesses that generate the most money are often the ones nobody can see from the road. So here's what I want you to understand before you go. The backyard income secret isn't about working harder or needing more land. It's about understanding what your neighbors are not seeing. It's about knowing that a propagation bench can out-earth a vegetable garden, that a shed can outperform a greenhouse, that rarity beats abundance, always. Your challenge this week is simple. Look at your own backyard or your living space. What plant or seed or specimen do you already own that you could propagate? What rarity could you quietly begin multiplying starting this weekend that might be worth something to the right community? Don't think big, think invisible. Start small, because sometimes the most profitable business is the one nobody else even knew was there. I really appreciate you watching this all the way through. If this opened your eyes to a different way of thinking about your backyard, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new strategy like this one. Leave a comment below. Tell me, what rare plant or species are you thinking about now? And make sure to turn on that notification bell so you catch the next one the moment it drops. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next.